Today's date is March 28, 2022, and we're in the home of Charles and Sharon Busch-White, and this is in Evansville, Indiana, and we're over by the Lynch Avenue Library. We're at 3806 Stanford Drive, and Charles and Sharon are donating over 300 World War II books to the Evansville Wartime Museum. The Evansville Wartime Museum has been in existence for a decade, and we've been open for 10 years. And Sharon is going to relay some of the things about her Evansville experiences. She's a 1965 graduate of Modern Day High School and has been in multiple other places since then, Fort Wayne, Atlanta, other places. And Charles is originally from Dayton, Ohio, and he has worked for NCR, National Cash Register. So we're going to spend most of the time talking to Sharon, but let me just show you real quickly what they're giving us. So this is these bookshelves plus these books. This is over 300 books on World War II that Sharon has collected over the last many years. This is a heck of a collection, and then you look at this collection over here. This is about the things that have happened in Auschwitz and with the Jewish population, and those are also paperbacks and will be given to the Wartime Museum for people in Evansville and other places to read. We will have them online and available for people to check some of them out. But this is a tremendous donation to our museum, and we'll talk a little bit to Charles, and then we're going to spend more time with Sharon. Charles, can you just tell us, okay, we're just getting ready we showed the books that Mr. and Mrs. White are donating to the Evansville Wartime Museum on today's date, 3/28/2022. We're going to say a few things about Charles and have him talk for a minute, but Charles from Dayton, Ohio, where the Wright brothers created their famous change of civilization with the creation of flight, I think December 17th of 1903. So things changed, and he grew up in that town. Dayton's a famous place for a lot of things. Anyway, his dad was also in World War II and had some shrapnel wounds and caused him some problems after the war. These are things that we see from the war, that we see people with all kinds of things. We lost lives. I had an uncle that died in World War II. My family never got over it. Never got over it. This tragedy changes the whole family, and it changed Charles's life and changed his family because of the trauma that his dad had in World War II. And these things are the costs of war, the costs of freedom. And that's a cost that is not financially can be put an exact number on. So Charles has gone through it, and Sharon, we will talk about some things. But Charles, what can you say about anything your mom would say about the war, or your mom or your grandparents, or things about the war of World War II we're just talking about this time?
Well, from my mother's point of view, and I've thought a lot about this, she was a young lady, 20 years old, had me, and my dad was in the war, came back with his experiences there with the shrapnel and everything, and now we know that there's mental reasons for these kind of things to happen. And he just went ballistic, and soon after that he wound up committing suicide and leaving this woman with a little baby and having to figure out how to cope with life. And my father's family had nothing to do with my mother because they thought it was her fault that he committed suicide. I mean, go back, there weren't any real rules back then. So it was tough for her, very, very tough, but we managed to get along.
A lot of women were left like that in World War II. We had 450,000 actually widows, and your wife was essentially a widow. 450,000 deaths in World War II, but many that aren't even quantified of what happened to your dad. Was he in the Army? Was he in Europe or in Japan?
He was in the Navy.
Over in Europe, probably? Yeah.
I know very little, because that's...
Well, thank you, Charles, and thank your dad for his service, and And that's part of our freedom, the cost that's happened for your mama and for you, because your mom had to raise you as a single mom, and that's not easy for a period of time. And then Charles has been running insurance companies and doing insurance company, and that's where he met his bride here to the left of him, Sharon, 14 years ago. So just tell us a little bit about your insurance company and how you met your wife, a little bit about that.
Well, we met about 30-some years ago here in Evansville, Indiana, with a company called Great Fidelity Life Insurance Company. It was purchased by an insurance company out of Fort Wayne. I was in Fort Wayne, so once a month rather, for a week, I would come down to Evansville. And we needed a claims manager and hired Sharon to be the claims manager. We moved the company from Evansville to Fort Wayne, and she went with it, and eventually found a great position with a company, Atlantic American, in Atlanta, Georgia. And 14 years ago, we connected and got married, and she wanted to come back home. So here we are, 3 years ago.
So 3 years ago, we came back to Evansville, and little Sharon there was a modern day graduate in 1965. Her grandparents grew up right by the old fire station on St. Joe Road, and her maiden name is Busch. Can you tell us, Sharon, your mom and dad's first and last name and your mom's maiden name?
Well, to make it easy, my mom graduated from Memorial, and her maiden name was Fabian, like the singer.
Fabian from Memorial. What year did she graduate Memorial? About 1941, in that range. She's born in 23 or so.
Yeah, she was, I think she was 18, Dad was 19 when they got married, and Dad shipped out, and right after Pearl Harbor.
So your mom and dad, did your dad go to what high school?
Right.
He went to Wright, so he's a West Sider.
Hill.
And yeah, and in your modern days, you're West Sider, Mama was an East Sider, Fabian. And how did your dad find her? Did he have to travel to the East Side? How did he find her?
It was a blind date by a friend of his, and Mom's good friend went to Memorial, and it was the Memorial and Wright's football game. Dad figured out if they rooted for Wright, there's two women that were going to club me. And if he rooted for Memorial, his best friend, who also went to Wright, would get him. So the whole football game, Dad took a very common sense to his rooting, and he rooted for Lincoln.
For Lincoln.
Yeah.
For Lincoln. So Lincoln was a school in Evansville until 1962, but he rooted for Lincoln, I see. And so he was neutral. He was playing neutral because he did Wrights, he was in trouble, and he was Memorial's in trouble. But he caught that lady Fabian, so whatever he did, he knew what he was doing.
When he went home that night, he told his mom and dad he just met the woman he was going to marry.
And that somehow people can know. All of a sudden they know. He knew it right away, didn't he? Huh. That somehow even men know. Isn't that something?
They were married for 49 years.
49 years. Wow. Wow. Okay, now, Sharon has a disease called ALS, same as Lou Gehrig had. It's a disease that's she's been facing, and that's why her speech is not perfect, but she's doing very well with that. But just so you know, she's got ALS, and that's the reason why her speech is not perfect, but she's doing super.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we got, with all these books, we're going to talk about your dad in World War II, as much as you know, and how your mom and where she worked at World War II, if she worked at one of the factories or not, or what she did during World War II, raise kids. And if you tell us just, let's talk about Mom first when she was here, because he left right after Pearl Harbor. So he left probably in early 42 to the service and was in a CB in the Navy. CBs usually ate nails because they were pretty strong and tough. But let's talk about Mom first, of what you remember, what she said about the war.
She did not work during the war. She went down to Lewisburg, Kentucky. That's where she had spent time as a young woman growing up. And her grandmother had land down there. So Mom spent most of the time with her grandmother in Lewisburg, unless she'd come back here because her mom was there. And she had my older sister before Dad shipped out, so she had the baby to take care of.
So she had two babies before Dad, one baby you. No, one baby your sister. Your sister, Warren, so she had a young child and she went to her mom's place in Lewisport. And that happened to a lot of people in World War II. We had a lot of mothers that were essentially single mothers because we had 15 million men and some women in World War II. So it took a lot of the young men away. So the women had to work or had to raise their children, and to raise a child by themselves is difficult. So your sister was raised by both your mom and your grandma there in Lewisport, Kentucky, where your grandma lived.
Right.
So then after the war, and so Mom and Dad must have married at 19 and 18 or so before 42 when the war started, and then he took off for 4 years and came back.
Well, unknown story about that. When he joined the Navy, he got sent up to Rhode Island for basic training. He got his orders. That was on the West Coast.
So he got orders to Rhode Island, and that's where he did basic training in Rhode Island, and then he got orders to the West Coast, somewhere on the West Coast.
So he knew he was going to the South Pacific. Well, coming by train, he went AWOL in Chicago and hitchhiked down here to see his mom and his daughter.
So he, on the way to California, he got to Chicago and he went AWOL to come see his little daughter, his baby, your older sister and mama, which was, you know, the homesickness of a kid never probably left home in his life, and here he is in Rhode Island for 3 months, and he never knew he's going to come back. He thought he'd never see his kid or his wife again. I went to war in the Persian Gulf War, and I had one baby and one in the oven, and I didn't know if I was going to come back, and we had a lot of big good odds on our side then. And then, at that time, he didn't know he's coming back. The fear of war in a human being is unbelievable. And your dad feared that he wasn't coming back, and he didn't care if he was AWOL. He just took off anyway because it was too important for him to see his little daughter and his wife.
Well, he figured also one guy going AWOL on that train, they weren't gonna miss him.
Yeah.
So he went AWOL. He survived back to Chicago, out to California. They never missed.
Never missed him. So many people in the troops. It was if you think of World War II, it was so chaotic to manage all these men and troops and all the industry. The world was topsy-turvy, and they didn't miss him. So he got to California, and then tell us what happened in California, Sharon.
Well, he got with his unit and checked in, and apparently nobody missed him. So he got by with it. I gotta tell you what happened after the war. There he was in the Philippines.
So he was in the Philippines, and he was a CB, and he was in the Battle of the Lady Gulf, which was the biggest naval battle ever. And a CB, he had to go to shore, and was pretty tough. And maybe you could tell us, if you know any stories about him at that time, why don't you tell us?
I don't. The only thing I know is when he was back on a ship, a troop ship, when Japan surrendered.
So he's on troop ship coming back to the United States when Japan, or maybe going to Japan if they were going to invade Japan, because a lot of them they weren't sending back because we had the atom bomb drop on August 6th and August 9th, but during that time we didn't know Japan was going to surrender, and if they didn't surrender, I probably wouldn't be here, you probably wouldn't be here, because your dad would have gone to war and we would have lost 500,000 men and women in that invasion of Japan. So you're here and I'm here because we didn't invade Japan. And he probably was on a troop ship that was going to go to Japan, and once they found the war was over, they sent him another way. When did he get back here? Because you're born in 46, or no, 47. So you're probably somewhere in there. Yeah.
Anyway, Dad, when he got back into San Diego, and he was going home, and his captain or whoever it was said, well, Jim, you can't go home. We've got to get you mastered out of the CB, get you discharged. Once you have your discharge, then you go home. But Dad told me, he said, wait a minute. You didn't need a paper for me to sign up. You got more paperwork on me than my mother does. They said, I'm going home. You've had over 3 years of my life. That's all you did. You sent the discharge paper to my address.
So what she just said is that he was supposed to be discharged, and they said to him that, well, you wait for your papers. And he said, look, I just gave you 3 years of my life. You mail the papers to me at home. And the loneliness, the yearning, once you hear the war's over, once something's gone, the time to get to your family is so crucial. I mean, I had that in the Persian Gulf War. I had 2 babies, and the time was so long getting back that stretched, even though he came back from Japan to the United States, the time to see his little daughter and his wife, that his daughter was then 3 or 4 years old, and his wife he hadn't seen in 3 or 4 years. It's unbelievable, the emotion. And he just told them, look, you send my discharge papers home. And you said he watched a movie about Lady Golf, and you saw him tear up, because he knew how, the movie itself didn't tell you how many people were injured and how bloody it was, but many people your dad's age couldn't even talk about the war, which he didn't talk about the war. Many of them never talked about it. Some of them I see would talk after age 85 or 90, but a lot of them never even talked about it. It was a part in their life that they grew up. The little kid, age 19, grew up because he had to, face the world and face his music. And when you having to be in the service, you have to do what you're told. And so he learned a lot of things. He grew up a lot, but the emotional time of being away from a wife that he loved and a little daughter was very difficult. And it's difficult. That's another sacrifice that our country doesn't know. We've got all these freedoms that not everybody appreciates, but the freedoms come from sacrifice that Sharon's dad did and Charles's dad did. And we have the prettiest and the best country in the world, but it comes at a cost. And Charles it's cost him with his dad, and your dad had probably some issues too as well, Sharon, after the war. Don't just forget what you saw. Can you tell us anything else about Dad, and then tell us about your 2 uncles you were bringing up? Anything else about Dad that you think we need to say?
Dad was proud that he served this country.
Yeah.
But the one thing he did, he promised Mom that if he made it home, he would never leave her again.
Yeah.
49 years of marriage, and the only time he ever left her was when he got sent to the Philippines.
Yeah.
He wouldn't even go to the grocery store without Mama.
Yeah.
And every day you could see this man love her more than he did the day before.
Yeah. What she's just saying is that what was your mom's first name?
Catherine,
Yeah, so, and Dad's first name?
James,
James. So James, when you get 3 years over there, don't know if you're coming back in the Philippines. He never knew if he was coming back, but he promised Catherine that he'd never leave her, and he never did leave her for 49 years. That's a pretty big promise, but you probably saw, Sharon, some unconditional love. In this day and age, we don't see unconditional love very often, but unconditional love parents have for kids, and I guess God has for his children. But in marriages, it's not always seen unconditional love. But you were very lucky and your sister to be able to see unconditional love, and you probably saw that. And if the man has unconditional love, it's a pretty joyful experience, and you were lucky to be able to see that. And even though war was bad, it might have stimulated your dad to have that unconditional love a little bit, and that might be a good thing out of it. And he was proud of his service. He was proud of the country, and he knew how good the country was. Men that went at that time, my dad became a patriot. Your dad was probably a patriot more than the next generation sees, because until you see the chance of losing your freedom, you don't understand. And you know, if you see some of those books on Auschwitz over there, you know, those people lost their freedom and many lost their lives. 6 million lost their lives from, you know, from a tyranny of Adolf Hitler. So, you know, all that could have happened to us. You know, over 70 million people were freed from dictatorship in World War II, and your dad was part of that, and so was Charles' dad. So was my dad. So why don't we talk about anything else on your dad, or we can go to your 2 uncles. Are those your dad's brothers or your mother's brothers?
One is my dad's brother, and one was a brother-in-law.
I see. So your dad's brother was older than your dad?
Yes.
And so where did he go in the war, and tell me about what he did?
Uncle Charles was really quiet. All I know is that he was in the European theater. It was in France.
So he was probably in the army and in the European theaters, so in Atlantic and then in France. And if he's in France, he probably could have been in the Battle of the Bulge. He could have been in Normandy, but that was your brother's, or your husband's brother. How was he during his life after that? And how was your husband during his life after that? What did he do for a living after he got out of the service, your brother-in-law? Did he live in Evansville?
No, wait a minute.
Okay. Oh.
You were using me.
Oh, okay. So I was using it. Okay, let me retrace that. Okay, that we were talking. Oh, you were using. That was your dad.
You were saying her, yeah.
Okay, your dad's name is James. Okay, and he had a brother. And Charles. That's a Charles, and Charles went to Europe and then went to France. But you don't know a lot more about that. Now you had a brother-in-law. Tell us what his name. No. Okay.
No brother-in-law. I had another uncle.
Another uncle. Okay. And uncle, tell us about him.
Uncle Phil described himself.
Uncle Phil, last name. What's his last name?
Master Polito.
Master Polito. Oh my gosh, that's a tough name. So he's your mother's brother? No?
He was married to my dad's older sister.
Okay, your dad.
And Uncle Phil had been in the army. And he asked me one Memorial Day, have you seen the movie Patton? I went, oh yeah. He said, well, what do you think of it? And I said, after the movie, I thought, did he really just kill an animal on a bridge and throw it over? Uncle Phil, oh, that happened all the time. I said, you're kidding. He said, no. He said, he didn't have time to wait for that call. So he made me stop the Jeep. He get out, go up to the bridge that are going over houses. Save this animal. Patton was shooter. I was pissed off the bridge and coming back to the Jeep. they're okay, so let's go. I said, okay, Phil, you drove from town? I said, yeah, I thought you knew that. No, you never told me that.
So Phil is your uncle, and he drove for Patton. So Patton, she watched the movie, and remember George C. Scott was in the movie Patton,
Oh, God.
and Patton was one of the important generals in World War II. They have a museum on tanks, and he was a tank expert, practiced in the desert here in the United States. A tank museum over in Louisville is famous for him. Okay, so he drove for Patton for very long?
Off and on.
Yes.
No, I said, we always as driver. They said, no, he switched around.
Because the driver for Patton was killed in a car accident, and the driver for him grew up in Kentucky, just about 40 miles from here. They put him on TV, or his daughter on TV, and he, when Patton was killed, he was killed by another car, a truck running into him. It broke his neck, and he died within a day. But Phil was not his driver at that time.
No.
But there was a man just 40 miles from here that was his driver. But Phil had a lot of experiences. He drove for Patton because you saw all kinds of things with Patton.
Was telling me earlier, out, and said, he made me go up a hill. And he said, we go up to this hill. He get out, I get on this side. And just talk to the side, describing a battle that took place. And this was this group of soldiers, and he would describe the whole battle.
Yeah.
And Uncle Charles said that battle may have taken place in the 1400s, over 1200, but Patton.
Did Phil talk about Patton's dog, or he had a little stick he carried? Never talked about his dog or anything. Yeah.
No, he just talked about driving him and him getting out of the jeep, describing some battle.
Yeah. Was Phil from here?
No,
What was Phil's last name, and where was Phil from?
Master Polito.
Master Polito, and where was he from?
I asked, Cripolito. And he just said, tell me, now you can say this to anybody, you're not going to hurt my feelings. I'm your little Dago uncle from Philly. And that's how he would describe himself.
He was a little Dago from where?
From Philly.
From Philly. He's a little Dago from Philly. Yeah.
He was as kind as they come, and he was from Philadelphia.
What I want you to both say is, I want to know what you think the next generation, you've seen a generation of all kinds of things happen. What is the most important thing for the United States and for the next generation to do for our freedom and for military history? Do you have any things? I mean, you're giving us 300 books, so you must be a historian yourself, an appreciation of our freedom from World War II. Charles, you or Sharon have anything that we can leave the next generation with in regards to what they should do?
My thoughts are we should quit having large corporations buy everything from foreign countries to the point to where if we need something desperately, we can't get it, and bring things back home. I mean, why do we have to have oil from some other place? Why do we, the virus when that got started, we had to wait for China to give us parts to make the thing work. I think we need to become a little bit more independent. Not totally, but a little bit more independent. You get me on that subject.
You know, we used to be able to fabricate anything in the United States, and now if we actually went to war, can we fabricate and can we make things that we would need? We might have to import that. We may not be able to import it, but we were probably in Evansville a big tool and die industry and a tremendous art fabrication, and some of that art has gone to other countries, which we got to be careful with.
Because it's cheaper to have it done over there, and corporations make more money that way.
Yeah, labor is cheaper. How about you, Sharon? Any other things that the next generation you think should think about?
I think they need to read.
To read?
Read books. Not be about World War II. Read about Vietnam. Read about all the skirmishes we've been in. Get out of the house, get in your car, and go look at this country.
So Sharon says, read about the war, not just World War II, but Vietnam and other wars, and also travel in this great country that we have. Get in your car and travel. We have great interstate highways. We have great freedom that you can go see the beautiful country that our ancestors have made it a free place for us to go. She said, get in your car and go. Well, thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Charles White. You've been so pleasant today, and I will get a copy of this for your family and just for keepsakes, and we'll keep this at the museum and maybe have something on YouTube about this. We appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sharon lived in Chicago by a synagogue in Chicago, by a synagogue up in the city of Chicago. Can you tell us just about what the rabbi said and what you experience, or what your experience was around that area? Can you just say that?
I had a dog, and I would take the dog out for a walk every morning. And the rabbi and two elders would be sitting in front of the synagogue with this big book across their laps, and they were just chatting. Well, I walked down to the end, crossed over in front of the synagogue to the end of that walk. And when they see me start to walk, they'd stop talking, their heads would come up. They'd slowly see me walking the dog. And then they put their heads down and start walking. Well, I always told them, I would always say good morning, and they never said anything to me. One of these mornings, you're not just going to look up, you're going to nod and say good morning took about 6 weeks. And by God, they looked up, they nodded, they said good morning, and they went down. I went, yes.
You got him to say good morning. Yeah.
But the lady I rented the apartment from was a survivor of Auschwitz. When I would go to pay rent, I would always stay there for 30 minutes to an hour. And we would talk about the war and her experiences being an awesome place. She had a picture of a man looking out over the table. And one Saturday, she finally said, "Do you know who he is?" And I said, "Yeah, that's Janusz Korschak."
That's what?
Janusz Korschak.
What's that?
He was a European, well-known child psychologist, and he ran an orphanage and took care of these kids. My landlady worked at that orphanage.
Wow.
She's the only survivor.
And her family. How old was she when she was in Auschwitz? Did she say? Was she a young kid?
She was a young woman.
Young woman at Auschwitz, and she survived. Oh,
I would say she was in her 20s,
yeah.
late 20s, early 30s.
She was rare to be a survivor, and she appreciated life, but she was probably scarred a lot about that.
I will tell you, because I've shared this story with a lot of people, but no one have recorded it. Mrs. Feitag was the woman I was talking to. The Nazis wanted Korschak to work with them, and he refused.
So Korschak, the big psychologist in Europe, the Nazis wanted him to do some studies with him, and Korschak refused, according to her.
He did.
Uh-huh.
So they lined all the kids that came with him, including the help, would line up those kids, and they take one child every day to the gas chamber.
Because he said no. And they took one a day to the gas chamber. That's what this lady told you.
Dr. Korschak was very disturbed about the children. The children picked a name and they volunteered to go to the gas chamber, but he could not go.
He could not go.
Those little ones fought tooth and nail to be the next pick and then not take Dr. Korschak.
Did they know what they were going to do? They knew what was happening. Why did they want to do that?
Because he was like their father.
I see. And they
loved those little kids after him.
I see, yeah.
And finally, all the kids were gone. And there was Dr. Korschak and Mrs. Feitag. And they took the doctor to the gas station.
But not Miss Freitag. And this is the lady you knew in Chicago. What a story. Was that in Auschwitz? Oh.
And I will tell you, I was at a museum down in either Jacksonville or Tampa. It might be in Tampa. I went in to see what they had. Here was a picture of Dr. Korschak.
Wow, wow.
And a brief writing on what happened.
Yes.
I went up to the ladies at
At the museum, yeah.
at the entrance. And I told them, I said, your exhibit on Korschak and what happened to him is not right.
Is not what?
It's not right.
Yeah.
That is not what happened.
Uh-huh.
They told me that their historian really dug to see what information she could find. And what she wrote is what she found. And I said, well, I can tell you, there was one woman from that orphanage that did not die in Auschwitz. She was my landlady. And I started to tell them what happened, and they didn't want to hear it.
Yeah.
I gave them my name and phone number. And I said, if your historian would like to talk, I'll be more than happy.
And they never called. Yeah. Boy, that's very interesting. So Mrs. Freitag was the only survivor, and then she was in Chicago, and she's your landlady for Dr. Korschak. Korschak?
No.
Kor.
Feitag.
Freitag was the lady.
F-A-I-T-E-K.
Oh, F-E-I-T-E-K. F-E-I.
F-A-I.
F-A-I.
T-E-K.
T-E-K. Feitag. F-E-I-T-A-K.
Feitag. F-A-I-T-A.
T-A-K. I see. And what was the doctor's name? How you spell his name?
Janus is J-A-N-U-C-S-C.
The doctor. What was the doctor's name? Matt, how you say the last name? Say it.
Janus, his last name was Korschak. K-O-R-S-C-H-A-K.
Korschak. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Sharon. This is very revealing. That's very nice. People would like to hear this part. Yeah. Thank you again. And that was very moving for you to live with that Miss Freitag forever, wasn't it?
I just felt so sorry for her
Yes. Oh,
to have to go through that.
yes.
And I did ask her, I said, if I found somebody who would appreciate what you just told me,
Yeah.
do I have your permission
Yeah.
to share?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. People will appreciate that. I'll put that on YouTube as well. Okay. Thank you. Today's date is 4/2/22, and we're lucky to be here in the house of Sharon Busch-White. Sharon Busch is in Evansville, Indiana, is where we're doing this video. Sharon Busch was a West Sider, went to Modern Day High School, very good high school on the West Side, graduated there in 1965, then went to Loyola Chicago and stayed there till in the 68 or 69 area, then came back home, went to 1 year at Loyola, a Jesuit training place. But we want to hear about, she lived in an apartment there, and her landlady had some experiences in Auschwitz. And that's what we want to concentrate on now. Sharon has ALS, it's Lou Gehrig's disease, so her speech is not 100% clear, but she does very well. And she's had Lou Gehrig's for a while. Lou Gehrig's disease is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis is the diagnosis, and it affects the speech and affects the nervous system. And we're here at her home with her husband, Charles. And Charles is, and we a lot of times have a caregiver, and this is Charles. He's been her husband for how many years, Charles?
14.
So 14 years they've been married. And so we're going to concentrate on this apartment and this lady that knew a lot about Auschwitz. It's a very unique story, and Sharon knows it. So I'm going to let Sharon. She was in a northern Chicago, and so it was in a Catholic and Jewish neighborhood. Later, she moved after being there a year to the west side of Chicago, and she was there during the Chicago riots in 1968. But this would be about the year 66 to 67 or so. And let's tell her what Sharon, I'm going to let you talk. She's born in 1947. And this is 2022. So we're very lucky to talk to her. She's going to give us her memories of what, this is secondhand information, what the lady that was directly exposed to Auschwitz told her. So this is not a primary source, but this is a secondary source, which is very important to historical information. So Sharon, tell us how you met this lady in Chicago and what her name was.
Well, her name was Feitag. F-A-I-T as in Tom, E-K. And she worked back in Europe, and I believe it was in Poland. She worked in an orphanage, taking care of the orphans. And the person that started the orphanage was quite well known as a child psychologist. They wrote several books, but his pen name was Korschak.
Yandis, Y-A-N-D-I-S.
Actually,
Korwat, and spell the last name?
S-J-A-N. I have to say, give me a minute. J-A-N-U-S-Z. And his last name was Korschak. K-O-R-S-C-H-A-K.
So his name was Janusz Korszak, Januz Korszak, Korfzjaf.
No F.
No F. Korszak, Kor.
S.
Yes.
As in Sam. C-H-A-K.
Okay, Korf S
S.
F Schaf. Korshaf. And he's
No F. They're K's.
Korschaf. Okay.
A-K.
Schak. Okay. And his first name is Janusz. Januzsz.
U-S-J.
Okay, wait a minute. His last name, he's a famous psychologist taking care of an orphanage in Poland. His last name is Korschak. Korschak.
Right.
And his first name is
Yonder.
Janusz.
J-A-N-U-F-C-G.
Janufcj. Okay. Now, tell us how this psychologist, according to Mrs. Feitag, tell us what happened and what year that was, what approximate year, probably 43 to 45 in Poland. And so Hitler ran over Poland, I think, in 39. And so he had used the adults as labor for all his war industry. So what happened was it left a lot of kids as orphans. And so this psychologist was in charge of the Poland orphanage, which this lady worked for him. So Mrs. Feitag had first-hand experience about it. She was there over a year or longer.
It's Feitag. T-E-K. Not G, but K.
Okay, it's Feitag, F-A-I-T-E-K.
Got it.
That's her last name. And what's her first name?
I don't remember.
F-A-I-T-E-K. Okay.
And out of respect, if I knew her first name, I would never call her.
That's right, because you were younger at that time and you had to give her respect. So that's fine. Her name was Miss Feitag, F-A-I-T-E-K. So let's tell some stories. You had a year of being with her. You were her. She was your landlady. But you were by yourself up there. You were not married. You were by yourself, and so you got some time to talk to her in the evening or in the morning when you weren't busy. Did you have a job when you were in Chicago?
Yes. And I did share the apartment with another gal. But the other gal didn't really spend time with Mrs. Feitag.
Okay, but you did in the evenings or before work or on the weekends, probably, after you were done with working. So you got a fair amount of time and you thought it was interesting and she was friendly and you learned a lot. So tell us maybe about 4 or 5 stories you might have had from Mrs. Feitag about what happened over there in Poland in World War II. Was it about the middle of the war, or he was in charge of the orphanage? Dr. Korschak was in charge of the orphanage for probably many years.
Oh, yeah. And she diligently worked for him and loved the kids. And the children loved him.
She loved Korschak and the children loved Korschak. So did she tell you what a typical day was there in that orphanage? Did they have school? And what was her job in the orphanage?
She was there to help the kids.
Okay, so she was there to help the kids. So she probably had not much education, but she was there as a helping hand to him and his right-hand person.
I don't know. She never really talked much about her background.
Okay, so not much talk about that. That's fine. Okay, so tell me what two or three, the story about where the Germans, the Nazi Germans decided that they wanted to do experiments on these kids, and he said no. Dr. Korschak said, no, you're not going to experiment on these kids. The Nazis like to experiment. They did. There's a lady in our north of here named Kor, and she and her identical twin were experimented on, and she was the control, and her sister was experimented on. And she died in the recent past, as well as her husband. They were from Terre Haute. There's a museum named after them. So this was not uncommon for the Germans to look at kids to do medical experiments without having to go through a lot of what you call human rights, where you, as you were like a rat or a mouse, that we don't ask permission to do these experiments. So the Germans wanted to do that, and the person in charge is Dr. Korschak, so he stopped that. So the Germans were mad at him, and tell us what happened.
Well, the Germans wanted him. They wanted to use him and his skills as working with children, and he refused. The only way that the Germans thought they could get his cooperation was to take one of the kids and threaten to put them in the gas chamber.
And they were trying to bribe him, and he knew what was happening. They were taking him and putting him in the gas chamber, and they offered the kids, they were doing it for helping him, but the Germans were trying to use that as leverage and bribe Dr. Korschak to do the experiments, but he continued to refuse, so the Germans took one child at a time and put him in the oven.
Yes.
So then that went on until all the children were gone.
Yes.
And when all the children were gone, then this lady, Miss Feitag, and then they took Dr. Korschak, put him in the oven. Did she ever say why they didn't put her in the oven?
No, and she really didn't understand why they didn't. But for some reason, they didn't.
Yeah. So they didn't put her in the oven, but they didn't do it. So and she never understood why, but they could have put her in the oven.
Yeah.
Now, what did she say? So she got lucky and got out and then came to the United States and is a landlady up there. So did she have any other stories about what the life was like in the orphanage, or how much food they got, and had they lost a lot of weight, and was there a lot of illness then?
She never mentioned, that there were problems with food or clothing or anything else. Everything they had went to take care of those children. And if she and the good doctor and the rest of the staff had to go without food, they just went without it. Because the kids always came first.
So they've made a museum down in Florida about Dr. Korschak what city is that in? Do you remember? It's in a city in Florida that memorializes him as a very important psychologist during World War II.
Yeah, there's just